The train station breathed like a tired animal, exhaling steam and grief into the cold night air. Neon lights flickered above cracked tiles, trembling each time a train screamed into the darkness, and vanished again, like a ghost fleeing its own past. The smell of wet iron and old smoke clung to everything, wrapping around the bones of those who waited with hands buried in empty pockets and hearts buried under heavier things. Somewhere, a distant clock ticked endlessly, each second dripping like water into a bucket already overflowing with silence. The wind slipped through broken window seals, whispering over forgotten benches and abandoned luggage, carrying stories no one asked to hear. A woman stood near the far pillar, fingers rigid from cold breath trembling in the air like a fragile prayer. Her voice rose slowly, softly, a wounded melody that seemed too gentle for such a hard place. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Her name was Elara, and she sang for coins because it was the only way to survive without selling pieces of her soul she could never get back. The sound she made was not loud, and it was not perfect, but it was honest. It carried the weight of long nights and longer memories, of hands once held and promises once whispered under softer skies. Her coat was thin, frayed at the cuffs, and her boots let in water through a crack she could never afford to fix. A small, dented metal cup rested at her feet, already holding a few tired coins that reflected the station's sickly light like broken stars. Faces passed her in blurred fragments. Tired men, silent women, children pulled along by hands that had stopped believing in miracles. Some dropped coins without looking. Some looked and did not drop anything. Elara never lifted her eyes fully because the world above her voice had little kindness left in it. She sang anyway. She sang because silence hurt more. Across the platform, half hidden behind a steel support beam, a man stood very still. He wore a dark coat, clean but worn at the edges, as if it had lived through weather that never touched daylight. His hair was shorter than it once had been, streaked faintly with early threads of silver that did not belong to a man his age. His hands were clenched, veins faintly visible under pale skin, as though holding on to something terrible and precious at the same time. His eyes did not blink. He watched her. The sound of her voice struck him like physical force, driving breath from his lungs and pressing old, broken memories against the walls of his chest. He had known that voice once in softer rooms under warmer lights, when her laughter filled small kitchens and her humming curled through narrow hallways. He had known the way that voice softened when she said his name. He had known the way it trembled when she cried into his shoulder on nights when the world felt too large. Now she sang into cold iron and broken glass. A train arrived with a shriek of tortured metal. Wind rushed through the platform, tossing Elara's loose hair into her face. She lifted one hand instinctively to hold it back, and the movement was so familiar that the man's breath cracked. He had once brushed that same hair behind her ear with hands that had not yet learned how to let go. The train paused. Doors opened. People moved like shadows, entering and exiting lives as quickly as the mechanical hiss of air. The noise swallowed her song for a moment, but she did not stop. She never stopped. When the train pulled away again, her voice remained, fragile and stubborn, clinging to the air. A coin fell into her cup with a dull, tired sound. She offered a small nod of gratitude without lifting her gaze. Gratitude had become an instinct, not a feeling. The man stepped slightly back into deeper shadow, as if afraid the light might expose him more than he could bear. His jaw tightened. He was not supposed to be here. He was not supposed to exist in her world anymore. Elara shifted her weight, and pain shot through her ankle. She ignored it. Pain had become a language she understood well. What hurt more was the strange feeling in her chest. A quiet, unsettling warmth that flared every time she sang this particular song. It was an old melody, one she had written herself in the beginning of a love she had believed would last beyond everything. She hadn't meant to sing it tonight. It had simply found its way out of her. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered a laugh. Somewhere to her left, a suitcase toppled over. Life moved, uncaring and relentless. The man's eyes shone faintly under the flickering fluorescent light. His gaze traced the line of her shoulders, the way she stood too straight for someone so tired, as if pride was the last thing holding her together. A sudden memory surged through him. Her standing by a window years ago, sunlight in her hair, asking him never to disappear without saying goodbye. He had smiled then. He had lied. Elara's voice reached the soft, aching part of the song where the lyrics spoke of waiting in doorways that never opened. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the fabric of her coat for warmth. The metal cup vibrated faintly with the hum of the station, coins tapping together like anxious hearts. For one breathless moment, she felt it. That sensation of being seen, not watched in the way strangers watched, but known. Her shoulders tightened. She almost turned. He held his breath. Another train thundered into the station, lights blazing, interrupting the fragile thread that stretched invisibly between them. Wind roared. Paper trash skittered across the tiles. The moment shattered without breaking. By the time the wind died down, the man had moved farther down the platform, blending back into the architecture of solitude in steel. Elara finished her song quietly, the last note dissolving into the cold air, like a soul slipping from a body. She looked down at the coins, at the small evidence that she had been heard, even if only for a moment. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the metal cup. Thin face, tired eyes, lips that had forgotten how to smile. Somewhere in the crowd, a heartbeat that did not belong to her ached in perfect rhythm with her pain, and neither of them yet understood that fate had already begun to tighten its grip around their broken, invisible threads. Morning had once been a gentle thing. It used to arrive on warm sunlight and the soft creak of old wooden floors. It used to smell like brewed tea and dusted curtains and the faint, comforting scent of a body that had slept beside hers. Elara remembered those mornings as if they were still alive somewhere, preserved behind glass in a place time could not touch. Before the station, before the cold, before the way her voice learned to ache, they had lived in a small apartment above a closed bakery. The oven downstairs had died years before they moved in, but the scent of sugar and flour lingered in the walls like a kind ghost. The windows were narrow, but they let in just enough light to turn pale curtains into gold. He used to wake before her. She could still see him in memory, moving quietly through the tiny kitchen, careful not to wake her. She remembered the sound of the kettle, low and patient. She remembered bare feet on tiled floor, and the way he hummed tunelessly when he thought no one could hear. He always kissed her forehead before leaving. It was never rushed, never careless, as if he feared that if he hurried it, the world might tear something away. His name was only a whisper in her mouth now. But once it was a whole world, Adrian. She had said it with laughter, with anger, with love so bright it frightened her. She had said it into pillows and into cups of warm tea when he walked into the room. She had written it in the margins of old notebooks, along the corners of grocery lists, like a quiet promise to herself that someone in this world knew her. They had little money and even fewer plans, but they had believed in time. They believed time would stretch endlessly ahead of them like a long sunlit road. On Sundays, they walked to the river. The city was quieter then, less sharp. He used to take her hand as if he were afraid she might drift away with the current. Their reflections would break and reform in the moving water, two shapes never quite whole, but together enough. He talked of work less as the months passed. In the beginning, he had been open, laughing about difficult supervisors and long hours. But the jokes softened, then disappeared. He came home later, smelled faintly of metallic air and unfamiliar streets. Sometimes he would sit very still at the small kitchen table, staring at nothing, as if trying to remember how to be ordinary. She noticed everything. She was not a woman who lived blindly. She felt the shift in his breath when he held her at night, the tension in his fingers as he laced them through hers. She felt the way headaches began to arrive behind his eyes, unspoken, pressing outward like a storm he refused to name. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she had told him once, her voice barely louder than the ticking of the cheap clock on their wall. He had smiled, that soft smile that had always undone her, and said, "I know." It had not been the truth. One evening, a letter arrived. It was thin, official, heavy in ways paper is not supposed to be. He held it in his hands longer than necessary. Read it twice. 3 times. She pretended not to stare, though every part of her was watching the way his shoulders tightened. "Just work," he said when he noticed her gaze. "Nothing we need to worry about." Later that night, when she lay against his chest, she felt his heart beating too fast. He started leaving earlier after that, returning later. The small home slowly filled with pockets of silence he did not explain. The kitchen lights stayed on long after midnight, but they spoke less beneath it. She began to write him letters, not because he was far, but because she sensed he was going somewhere she could not follow. Little notes she slipped into his coat pockets. He'd come back safe. Eat something warm. You love you. She did not know who she was trying to protect, him or herself. The night before everything broke, it rained. The kind of rain that erased the edges of the world. Heavy, endless. They sat together on the floor because the old couch had collapsed months before, their backs against the wall, knees pulled in. Candlelight moved between them, trembling shadows across tired faces. I might need to leave for a while, he said, without looking at her. Her breathing stopped, but her face didn't move. She had learned not to beg, not to fall apart too quickly. How long is a while? She asked. He shook his head slowly. I don't know. That was the first time she felt real fear, not loud fear, not screaming fear. A quiet, hollow fear that settled deep inside her bones. She reached for his hand anyway, because even in fear she loved him. I'll be here, she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her like he was memorizing a world he feared losing. The candlelight caught in his eyes, and for a moment he looked like a man already mourning something that hadn't yet died. The day he left, the air felt wrong. Not empty, just tilted. Like the world had leaned slightly off its axis without warning. He kissed her longer that morning, held her tighter. I will come back, he whispered against her hair. She believed him. That was the cruelest part. Weeks passed with no word, then months, then the knock at the door. 2 strangers, flat voices, official expressions, a folded paper with words that felt too large and too sharp to belong in her small hands. Missing, presumed dead, regret. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She just stood very still, like a glass that had cracked but not yet shattered. Now, years later, standing on the cold, broken platform, she sang with a voice shaped by that quiet moment of loss. The silence he left behind had grown inside her, wrapping itself around her lungs and weaving itself into every note she sang. And somewhere behind her, in the shadows of the station, the man who was never supposed to return felt that silence rise up inside him too, heavy and alive, waiting for the moment when it would finally break. The first time Elira sang for money, her hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped her cup. It wasn't pride that trembled in her fingers. It was something older, something more painful. The fear that if she stepped into this version of herself, there would be no way back. She stood at the edge of the station wall, close enough to the warmth of the lights to feel seen, but far enough to disappear if she needed to. The air smelled like burned brakes and wet cement. Her throat felt dry. Her heart felt louder than the train's. She sang anyway. It was a small song, soft, barely more than a whisper wrapped in melody. She chose one she used to hum while washing dishes, when her world had been warm and human and full. Back when she sang only for walls and windows, and the man who leaned in doorways to listen. A businessman dropped the first coin. It hit the metal cup with a sound that felt heavier than its weight. A dull, unforgiving clang. Her eyes flicked downward for one breath too long before she caught herself. That sound carved a line through her. It wasn't just money. It was proof that she had crossed something invisible and sacred. Sacred, the first lie had already been told, not by her, but by the world. They had told her he was gone. Dead. Silenced forever. They had told her she should be grateful to have an answer at all. They had told her that absence was closure, that folded papers and official stamps could replace a heartbeat. She had nodded to them, thanked them, closed the door gently behind their retreating footsteps, and then she had sat on the floor with her back pressed to the wood and tried to understand how a soul could be erased by ink. At first, she waited. She counted days in the steam fogging the kitchen window. She counted nights in the slow drip of the faucet that would never quite close. She left the porch light on long past midnight and fell asleep fully clothed in case she heard his key at the door. The second week was when the food started to run out. The fourth week was when neighbors stopped knocking. By the third month, silence had filled every cabinet, every corner, every soft space that had once held his breath. People said things without looking at her. He was brave. At least you have memories. You'll be fine. Fine was a word that did not belong to her anymore. The bakery downstairs closed completely that winter. The sweet ghost smell of sugar faded from the walls. The staircase grew colder. The landlord's patience wore thinner. The phone stopped ringing entirely. That was when she came back to the station. At first, she came only to sit. To be among movement, among departure. It felt easier to breathe near engines and rails than in a room that still smelled faintly like him. She watched couples clutch tickets, Children tugging at sleeves, businessmen checking watches with anxious hands. She watched life move because she could not. One evening, a street musician lost his voice. He had been there every night. A middle-aged man with a cracked guitar and eyes that smiled, even when he had nothing. He stood at the opposite end of the platform, singing for warmth, for survival, for dignity. That night, he coughed until blood colored the corner of his mouth. He packed his guitar slowly and left. The space he left behind felt wide, empty. Waiting. Elora stood in it without knowing why. She opened her mouth without planning to. The sound came out broken at first, then steadier. People paused. Not many, not enough, but a few. A woman with tired eyes, a young boy holding his mother's hand, a soldier with dust on his boots. And then the coin fell. She hated how much she needed that sound after. Hated how the next night she found herself there earlier. Hated how, the next week, she memorized which wall sheltered best from the wind. Hated how she learned to read footsteps, which ones might stop, which ones would never slow. Through it all, the lies remained. She was told the body was never recovered. She was told the mission had been classified. She was told to be patient. One afternoon, long after she had stopped expecting answers, her childhood friend Mira found her on the platform. Mira smelled like clean laundry and warm kitchens. Her coat was thick. Her gloves matched. Her eyes softened when she saw Elara. You shouldn't be here, Mira said gently. I should be somewhere, Elara replied. Anywhere that feels real. Mira hesitated. You're still hoping, aren't you? Elara didn't answer, because hope felt like a dangerous word. Oh, because saying it might crack something that had been barely holding together. E said he died, Mira continued too softly. And they said it was certain. They said a lot of things, Elora replied. Her voice didn't shake. It had learned not to. Mira reached into her pocket and pulled out a coin. Brand new. Unmarked. She placed it carefully into Elora's cup as though it were not money but a fragile piece of something sacred. Just be careful, she said, with your heart. Mira left. The coin remained. That night, something strange happened. A man stopped and watched her longer than most. He was in a dark coat, hair neat, eyes unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just listened. Really listened. When she finished her song, he didn't clap. He didn't speak. He simply dropped a coin into her cup and walked away. She picked it up later. It wasn't local currency. That unsettled her more than any silence ever had. From that day on, small inconsistencies began to appear like cracks in ice. The way officials avoided her questions. The way files were sealed too abruptly. The way Mira mentioned, once, very quietly, that some names were removed from reports before families ever saw them, and somewhere far above the platform, hidden in the veins of the city, a truth shifted slightly, just enough to breathe. On the platform that night, as Elara sang into the cold, she felt it again. That strange warmth, that quiet, invisible presence. She did not turn. She told herself it was exhaustion, memory, ghosts of a love that would never return. She sang anyway, and unseen in the crowd, the man who had listened without touching applause held his breath as the sound of her voice wrapped around him like a wound that had never closed. The man did not remember how long he had been standing there. Time behaved differently when you were hiding from your own name. Each minute folded into the next, shapeless and heavy, until only the sound of her voice gave the night any kind of structure. He told himself he would leave after one song, but the song ended and he stayed. His reflection haunted the dark glass of the station windows. A man years older than he was supposed to be. Eyes darker, shoulders carrying invisible weight. The coat he wore was borrowed. The face he showed the world was practiced. The name he answered to belonged to someone else, but inside, where no one could see, he was still Adrian. He kept to the edges of the crowd where shadows clung more tightly and the light stumbled before reaching him. He watched the way she stood. Too straight, too stubborn. As if she refused to bend even when the world clearly wanted to break her. He watched the way her fingers trembled slightly when the wind cut through her sleeves. Memories crowded behind his eyes. Those same fingers tracing patterns on his wrist when they were young, those same hands covered in flour when they baked cheap bread in a too small kitchen. He had told himself she would be safe if she believed he was dead. That lie had been as heavy as any truth. The mission had been spoken in whispers. The kind of work that erased people quietly. The kind of work that didn't end in medals or homecomings. He had been given a choice dressed up as duty. Disappear or put her in danger, be mourned or make her a target. He had chosen disappearance. He had chosen silence. In another part of the station, a child laughed. The sound twisted painfully in his chest. He wondered sometimes what kind of laughter might have lived in their home if he had stayed. What kind of future he had folded away when he walked out that rain-soaked morning and did not look back. He forced himself to breathe slowly. She finished another song. Coins fell, sparse and tired. Sparse and tired. She thanked no one, but her head bowed slightly, the way she always had. She was thinner than his memory. Sharper around the edges, but the heart of her face, the part of her that had once looked at him as if the world had finally made sense, was still there. A train arrived, and the blast of wind shoved against him like a wall. He almost stepped forward. It was not a choice made with words. It was instinct. A pull in the blood. A breaking in the chest. His foot shifted, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it felt like thunder inside him. Her hair lifted in the rush of air, and for a heartbeat, her eyes moved in his direction. He stepped back. The oath returned to him like a weapon. The files. The warnings, the unmarked cars that idled outside safe houses, the quiet men who did not blink when they said her name. He remembered being told, very calmly, that love was a weakness. He had believed them. He had to keep believing them. When the train left, the night felt emptier. The sound of engines faded, leaving only distant traffic and her breathing song. She switched to a song he recognized immediately, one she had written at the small table beneath the cracked ceiling fan, while he watched her with wonder and fear. He remembered the night she sang it to him alone, the way her eyes shone like she was afraid of losing something she had just begun to understand. He had kissed her to hide his own tears. Now she sang it to strangers, to walls, to cold, indifferent rails. His hands curled tighter in the pockets of his coat. He imagined stepping out, imagined speaking her name, imagined the way it would sound on his tongue after all this time. He imagined shock crossing her face, then anger, then a softness that might never return. He imagined her touching his face like she used to when words were not enough. The visions were too dangerous. He turned his head away for a moment, just to breathe without breaking. There was a man nearby watching him. Not casually, not like a passerby. The kind of watchful glance that measured distance and threat and memory. Adrian felt it immediately. Training never left you. It only learned to sleep. The man's eyes flicked to Illyra and back again. Adrian shifted slightly, angling his body so he was less visible. He could not bring danger to her doorstep. Not now, not ever. That had been the point of everything. The man eventually looked away, lost in the flow of crowd and cold. His pulse slowed, but only slightly. Her song ended. Slightly, her song ended. She stood in silence for a brief second, like she always did, as if thanking the night itself for listening. She looked down at her coins, not counting them, just acknowledging them, the way someone might acknowledge footsteps in snow. He realized he was closer to her than he had planned. 2 rows of people away. One careless movement could catch her attention. He froze. She shifted her weight, and her face turned a fraction toward where he stood. Not fully, not enough to see him. Just enough to make his heart slam against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He thought of the word home and felt something inside him fracture. The station clock ticked loudly somewhere above them, midnight sliding toward something quieter, deeper. A moment passed where neither of them moved, though were surrounded by motion. She gathered her coat tighter around herself. He stepped farther into shadow. He stepped farther into shadow. She began another soft song, one he did not recognize, maybe one born after he had left, shaped by pain he had no right to touch. He listened anyway. In that crowd, in that cold, in that broken space between what had been and what was forbidden, he understood something terrible and beautiful at once. He had not saved her. He had not protected her. He had simply abandoned her to a different kind of war. And as her voice wrapped around his heart like winter fog, he knew he would keep coming back to this platform, no matter what it cost him, because watching her live, even from shadows, was the only truth he still had. The crowd shifted. The night deepened. And fate moved one step closer without either of them daring to see it. The smallest room in Illyra's apartment had become a shrine made of paper. She rarely went inside it anymore, not because she hated it, but because it held too much of her. A wooden chair sat beneath a low, angled ceiling, its cushion worn thin. A narrow table waited against the wall, and inside its single drawer lay the life she had tried to forget. That night, after leaving the station with aching fingers and a voice that tasted like old sorrow, She unlocked the door. The air inside was dry and familiar, like breath held for too long. Dust hovered in the dim light as she slid the drawer open. The first envelope rested on top, yellowed at the edges, her handwriting faint but still alive. Adrian, today the sun felt warmer than yesterday. I don't know why I noticed that, but it made me think of you. Her fingers tightened. She had never sent most of these. At first, she had planned to. Then the knock came. Then the words, missing it, and it presumed fell into her hands like stones. After that, the mailbox felt like a cruel and meaningless mouth. She lifted another. Adrian, the faucet still leaks. I still haven't fixed it. I pretend it's not broken. I think I learned that from you. Her lips pressed together. The man in the station had shifted again that night, closer, quieter. She had felt it in her spine. The warmth, the gravity. She told herself she was imagining it. She had learned to mistrust her heart the way a wounded animal mistrusts touch. She pulled out another letter. Adrian, I don't know if you're coming back. I don't know if I'm supposed to stop waiting. But if you can hear me anywhere, just know I talk to you when the world gets too loud. Her breathing slowed. Beneath the letters lay a thin folder she did not remember placing there. That was the strange part. She would have remembered. She always remembered. The folder was a dull gray. Official. Dull gray. Official. Her fingers hovered above it like it might burn. When she opened it, the sound felt too loud. Inside were photocopies, reports, dates, names she had never seen before. Her eyes moved slowly, carefully, like walking across thin ice. Marked. Casualty status. Altered. Her heart stumbled. She turned the page. Deployment. Redacted. She turned another. Next of kin notification. Amended. Her hand shook. Amended. She read the word 3 times like maybe it would soften. A faint knock sounded at her door. She froze. The folder stayed open in her hands. Another knock. She slid it back into the drawer, closed it quickly, and moved through the narrow hall. When she opened the door, Mira stood there, wrapped in her familiar scarf, looking pale. I was nearby. Mira said softly. I thought you might still be awake. I don't sleep much, Elara replied. Mira hesitated. Her eyes flicked past Elara's shoulder, as if she could see the untouched air inside. You've been down to the station a lot, Mira said. Elara nodded. It's easier to breathe there. Mira's fingers tightened around her scarf. Some things are hard to see clearly when we're tired. Elara looked at her. What are you trying to say? Mira swallowed. I heard something, she said. Silence stretched between them like a fragile rope. From who? Mira lowered her voice. My cousin. He works in municipal records. He shouldn't talk about things, but sometimes he does. Another beat. They said certain files don't stay the same, Mira whispered. That some names disappear. Some statuses change. Elara felt cold, even in her bones. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Mira's eyes softened. Because I don't like the way you look these days. And because I don't believe the world is always as honest as the papers say it is. Mira left soon after, warmth lingering faintly like the outline of a held hand. That night, Elara didn't sleep. The world is always as honest as the papers say it is. She lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the building breathe. She thought of the folder, the word amended, the man in the crowd. The next day, she went back to the station. It had rained earlier. The tiles shone like mirrors broken into 1,000 pieces. The air smelled clean and sharp and restless. She stood in her usual place, her metal cup waiting, her hands folded around herself. She sang. It wasn't one of the old songs. It wasn't one of the sad ones. It was quieter, searching, as if her voice were walking slowly through rooms she had not entered in years. And he was there again, closer. Not enough to touch, not enough to be seen fully, enough to be felt. He watched the way her gaze lifted slightly, the way her shoulders seemed to tighten as though some invisible thread tugged at her. Across the crowd, a man in a heavy coat observed the scene with too much interest. Adrian noticed instantly. The man moved like someone looking for mistakes. Measuring footsteps, remembering faces, Adrian shifted his weight, stepping farther from Elara without letting her vanish from his sight. Danger pulsed faintly in the air now. Not loud. Quiet. The kind that lived in side glances and unnaturally calm expressions. Elara finished her song. A coin dropped. She picked it up later, turning it between her fingers. It was scratched. On one side, a faint symbol she didn't recognize. Not a mint mark. Not an accident. A deliberate carving. Her breath caught. At home later, she reopened the drawer, pulled out the fold, ran her finger over the word amended like it might bleed. She took out a fresh piece of paper. and wrote one last letter she never planned to deliver. Adrian, something is wrong with the story they told me. And tonight, for the first time in years, I think the silence might be lying, too. She folded the page, placed it back with the others, and closed the drawer with shaking hands. Back at the station, unseen, the man who had once walked away from love felt a shift in the world's quiet rhythm. Somewhere, a lie began to loosen. Somewhere, a truth leaned closer to the light. And neither of them yet understood how close the silence was to breaking. The storm arrived without warning, like grief that finds you in the quietest moment. The sky, once dull and indifferent, cracked open above the city and poured itself down in violent sheets of rain. Thunder rolled through the station's iron bones, making the old structure tremble as if it remembered other disasters it had never spoken of. Wind forced its way through gaps in the roof, scattering scraps of paper and dust across the platform like restless spirits. Elora stood beneath the rusted overhang, her coat already soaked at the shoulders. She could have left. Many had. The benches were emptying, footsteps retreating into safer places, but she didn't move. The station felt more alive in storms. The noise helped drown the quieter sounds inside her, the unanswered questions, the shifting memories, the growing certainty that something in her world was wrong. She lifted her chin and sang. The rain was so loud it nearly swallowed her voice, but she sang harder, as if trying to climb through the downpour with nothing but breath and will. The melody was unfamiliar even to her. It rose out of her chest raw and honest, shaped less by music and more by instinct. Her fingers curled against the fabric of her sleeves, fighting the cold. Across the platform, Adrian pulled his coat tighter. He was not supposed to be there. Every warning his training had given him screamed at his spine. Storms were chaos. Chaos was visibility. Visibility was danger. He shifted closer to one of the steel pillars, letting his outline melt into shadow, but his eyes never left her. She looked smaller in the storm. Not weaker, just more fragile, like glass staring the world to break it. The thunder crashed again, and for a split second, the lights flickered. The station dipped into half-darkness, half-memory. In that brief stutter of light, Elora's eyes lifted and met his. The world tightened. It was not a clean look, not a clear recognition, just a collision of something ancient and immediate. Her gaze caught on him, slid away, and snapped back again, as if her soul had stumbled over something it knew but could not name. His pulse slammed so hard it hurt. She knew. Not fully. Not with words. But some part of her, the part that had shared breath and skin and quiet dreams with him, felt the impact. Rain lashed sideways, forcing her to blink. Another thunderclap tore through the sky, and she lost him. A rush of people surged between them, sheltering from the storm, stumbling, shouting. The platform turned into moving shadows and wet coats and blurred faces. Adrian stepped back instinctively, turning his shoulder to block the line of sight. When he looked again, the connection was gone. Her voice continued. But it shook now. Her voice continued. Not from cold, from something else. Confusion sat like a live wire in her chest. Her thoughts tangled around the shape of a memory she could not fully touch. The crowd began to thin again, the storm's violence keeping most people inside the carriages of delayed trains. Water dripped in steady rhythm from the broken edges of the roof, striking the tiles like a second clock. She finished the song and let the last note dissolve into thunder. Her hands were trembling. The metal cup rattled faintly as another gust of wind pushed it along the floor. She caught it, steadying it with her foot. Inside, only a few coins clung together, their faint clinks drowned by rain. She felt watched. Not in the way she had grown used to. Not the indifferent gaze of strangers, something closer, more intentional. Across the platform, Adrian felt eyes on him. The man from before, the one with the assessing stare, had moved closer. His footsteps were careful, quiet, too controlled for a simple commuter trying to avoid the weather. Adrian shifted again, letting his body angle naturally, appearing casual while measuring distance, escape routes, lines of sight. Danger was no longer theoretical. The storm made it harder to disappear. Elora gathered herself and began another song, mostly so she didn't have to think. The sound of it felt thin against the roar of the rain, but she sang anyway. She sang because if she stopped, her mind would go back to that fraction of a second when her eyes had locked with something impossibly familiar. He couldn't be alive. They said he wasn't. They said it gently, carefully, like people delivering glass. But the warmth she had felt had not been imaginary. In the shadow of the pillar, Adrian fought a battle no one could see. Every instinct told him to step away from the light, from her, from the widening circle of risk. Every memory told him to step forward, to close the distance, to say her name and let whatever happened happen. He did neither. The storm broke something in him. He saw clearly now what he had done. Not an abstract sacrifice, not a strategic retreat, but a life hollowed and exposed. He had removed himself from her world like cutting a piece of skin and leaving the wound open. The man watching him turned away, momentarily distracted by movement on the tracks. Adrian knew it wouldn't last. Thunder rolled again, deeper, closer, as if the sky itself were listening to something secrets had passed from mouth to mouth. The lights flickered once more, but this time held. Elara's song faltered. She stopped singing. For the first time in years, she stopped before the end of a song. Her throat closed, her chest tightened, her gaze lifted again, searching the space where she had felt that impossible connection. Nothing. Only rain. Wind. Strangers. Her breath came uneven. Someone brushed past her shoulder, muttering an apology she barely heard. She nodded by reflex, but her body felt disconnected from her mind. Behind the pillar, Adrian felt something like failure twist through him. He had let the moment shatter. He had let fear decide. When the storm began to soften, the platform came alive again. Footsteps returned. Murmurs. Conversations about delays in weather and small inconveniences. The normal world. Elara's fingers curled around the rim of her cup, knuckles pale. She could not explain it. She did not have language for it. She only knew that the emptiness inside her was no longer silent. It had begun to whisper. Adrian stepped back into deeper shadow. The man with watchful eyes scanned the platform once more, then moved toward the exit, but not before glancing at Elara. Not before noticing where she stood. The night felt heavier now, not with rain, with awareness. Elara packed away nothing, because she had nothing to pack. She simply moved closer to the warmth of the overhead lights and waited for the last train to arrive. Heart beating too fast for a world that insisted everything was as it had always been. Across the platform, unseen by her, Adrian felt the storm settle inside his chest. He understood, finally, that their paths were no longer running parallel. They were bending. Slowly, inevitably, towards something neither of them could escape. The broken coin revealed itself on an ordinary night. There was no storm, no thunder to announce it. The sky was a dull, exhausted gray, as if the clouds themselves had grown tired of carrying secrets. The station felt unusually quiet, not empty, but hushed, like a room where someone had just said a name too loud. Elara stood in her usual place, shoulders relaxed from habit rather than comfort. Her voice moved through a song that tasted of old evenings and colder mornings. Each note left her with a small ache, the familiar kind. The kind she had learned to live inside. Her metal cup rested before her, holding the day's quiet evidence that she still existed in other people's lives, even if only briefly. A coin dropped. It sounded different. Not dull. Not tired. Sharper. She finished the song and bent down to pick it up. Not scratched like the one before. Not worn by time. It was split cleanly through the middle, like something that had been broken on purpose and glued back together improperly. Along its surface ran a thin, uneven line, as if someone had tried to hide the damage and failed. Her fingers tightened around it. A strange memory flickered. A rain-soaked afternoon years ago. Adrian laughing about a broken coin from an old street vendor, how it had split in two in his hand. He had offered her half, joking that if they ever got lost, they could match the pieces and find their way back to each other. She had kept that half for months. When he vanished, she threw it into the river. Now she stared at this one and her breath caught. The choice felt cruel and familiar. Late that night alone in her room, Elara held the two halves together again, aligning the crack. They fit perfectly, like they had never been broken, like they had always... He wasn't allowed to. The man stepped back. "This is as far as I can take you." Elara closed the file slowly, tucking it under her arm. "You've already done enough." When she stepped back out into the evening air, the sky had turned a deep, waiting blue. The wind carried the smell of the river and something colder. The realization that grief did not disappear simply because it had been built on a lie. Back at the station that night, she sang again. But her voice had changed. It was no longer only about loss. It carried questions now, sharp edges. A quiet fury that shimmered just beneath the melody. The metal cup waited at her feet, but she barely noticed it. Adrian stood farther down the platform, hands hidden, heart in fragments. He had felt it. Something had shifted. Her voice was no longer the voice of a woman who believed in the finality of death. It was the voice of someone who had seen cracks in a sealed world. It trembled differently, like glass about to be broken from the other side. He had seen the symbol on the coin before. He had signed papers that contained it, and he had believed the lie as much as she had. Alive, he whispered to himself, tasting the word like ash. He remembered the day they had told him. Not good news, not relief, just an order: live, vanish, obey. He had believed he was protecting her, had believed she would move on, build something clean and safe without him. Now, watching her sing with eyes that no longer accepted silence, he understood what he had truly done. Not protected. Abandoned. A train arrived, but he did not move. He watched a man approach her. Different man, nervous. He dropped a coin, too quickly, eyes scanning the crowd the way trained men did. The lies were not finished. They were simply moving in new shapes. Illyra noticed. Their eyes met briefly, not with recognition, but with shared awareness of danger. She pulled the broken coin halves from her pocket, clasping them in her palm where no one could see. Not today, she told herself. But soon. She finished her song and lifted her gaze slightly, scanning the shadows. She did not see Adrian, not clearly, but she felt him closer now, as if the world between them had thinned. Somewhere a clock ticked too loudly. Somewhere someone breathed too carefully. The living had lied. And the dead were no longer willing to stay silent. He learned her pain by the way she breathed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It lived in the slight delay before her chest rose, in the way her shoulders lifted when the cold bit deeper, in the way her eyes, sometimes unfocused as if drifting back to a place only she could see. Adrian stood at the far end of the platform, wrapped in shadow, wrapped in consequence, and watched her carry a life he had not prepared her for. Every time she sang, he felt it like a bruise pressed too hard. Her voice had always held softness, but now it carried something heavier. A thin, trembling thread of fury stretched beneath the melody. He could hear the questions in it, the loss, the betrayal that had not yet fully formed into words, but already lives like a wound turning inward. She was thinner, not just in body, in soul. Her coat hung looser around her shoulders, and her cheeks had grown sharper, as though life itself had carved pieces of her away. She smiled occasionally at children who passed by, at old women who dropped coins with careful hands, but her eyes had forgotten how to rest. Adrian counted her breaths between songs. He counted the moments she shifted her weight to hide pain in her ankle. He counted how often she swallowed before starting again. This was what protection had become: watching, waiting, hurting in silence. Behind the thin glass of the station windows, his reflection looked like a stranger. He barely recognized the man who flinched when she coughed, the man who leaned forward slightly whenever a stranger got too close. He had trained himself to endure torture, isolation, fear. He had not trained himself to survive seeing the woman he loved unravel without being able to touch her. A man approached her with a smile too smooth. Adrian's muscles tightened instantly. The stranger dropped a coin, but he lingered. Eyes traveling where they shouldn't. Too slow to leave. Too interested. Adrian shifted his stance, angling his body toward them without making it obvious. The man noticed, stiffened, and walked away. Illyra did not look back. She had learned to avoid seeing what she could not fight. A train arrived, bathing the platform in harsh white light. For a brief, dangerous second, Adrian was exposed. Anyone looking closely could have traced the tension in his frame, the calculating stillness of a man measuring exits and threats. Illyra glanced up, just as the doors hissed open. She didn't see him. She saw light. Movement. Noise. When the light faded, he was gone again. He felt the guilt differently now. Before, it had been a distant weight. Something abstract. A burden you learned to live under. Now it was immediate. Personal. It lived in the way her fingers trembled as she lifted her cup, in the way she sang louder some nights and softer other nights, as if negotiating with pain. He saw her once when she thought no one was watching. Her voice had cracked mid-song. Not loudly, just a fracture. She lowered her head for a heartbeat too long, her hands curled into the fabric of her coat, knuckles pale. She breathed in through her nose, slowly, and forced her voice back into place. No one else noticed. He did. It broke something inside him. Across the tracks, the watchful man returned. Adrian felt him before seeing him, the rhythm of trained footsteps, the controlled stillness. He shifted back into deeper shadow, making himself part of a broken vending machine's reflection. His heart slowed automatically, breath shallow and calculated. The man scanned the platform, watched Ilera, not with kindness, with measurement. This was no longer about mistakes, no longer about files. Someone was closing in. Adrian felt it in the way the man's gaze lingered on the place where her coin cup sat, in the way his jaw tightened. She was becoming a target, and Adrian had brought her here. Here. The realization slammed into him like cold water. He had believed distance was safety. He had believed silence was armor. But she was hurting out loud now, where strangers could see, where watchers could track patterns. He had not saved her. He had placed her under a different kind of spotlight. One evening, she faltered, not during the song, after. Her knees buckled slightly as she shifted to sit on the bench. She caught herself with one hand, but fatigue flickered openly across her face before she masked it. She pressed 2 fingers briefly against her temple, breathing slowly. No one moved, no one asked, no one cared. Adrian stepped forward unconsciously, then stopped. He could not be the one to touch her. He could not be the one to ask. Not yet. Someone else approached her, a woman with kind eyes and grocery bags. The woman offered a small piece of wrapped bread. Ilera hesitated, then accepted it with a soft nod. Her fingers almost shook as she broke it in half. Adrian watched her eat like a starving animal watches fire, something both comforting and dangerous to need. A memory surfaced against his will. Her laughing in their kitchen, flour smudged on her nose, tossing him small bits of dough as though happiness was something you could throw and catch. He closed his eyes for barely a heartbeat. When he opened them, she was back under fluorescent lights. Wrapped in worn cloth, chewing quietly like survival was a habit instead of a life. Later that night, as he followed her from a safe distance through dim streets, he saw her pause outside a pharmacy window. She stared at a display of pain medicine she could not afford. She lifted her hand, pressed fingertips to the glass, then let it fall. She walked away without buying anything. He wanted to walk into that store and buy everything. Leave it anonymously, disappear again. He didn't. He understood too well what patterns could be traced. Back at the station, days blurred. Her songs changed, not in sound, in weight. They stopped asking questions and started answering them herself. She sang about silence, about footsteps behind doors, about shadows that didn't belong tonight. She sang in a way that told him she was no longer asleep inside the lie, and it terrified him. Terrified him. Because if she woke up fully, she would walk directly into the truth. Into danger. Into him. He stood one night in the deepest part of the station, heart aching so loudly he worried it could be heard, and whispered to the dark air, "I'm sorry." She could not hear him, but somehow across the distance she paused for a fraction of a second, as if something in her recognized the sound of regret. She finished the song with a softer note than she had begun. The crowd thinned. The night cooled. Adrian stayed. Because watching her suffer had become a punishment he believed he deserved. Because leaving the platform now would feel like killing her twice. And because somewhere inside his chest, a slow, terrible realization had begun to take root. Soon, he would have to choose. Stay hidden and let the world close in on her, or step into the light and destroy everything he had built to keep her safe. The stranger found her on a night when the air felt too quiet to be honest. Ilera had finished her last song and was gathering the few coins she had earned, her fingers moving slowly, tired, careful. The platform was thinner in people than usual, the late trains delayed, the world holding its breath in that peculiar way it sometimes did just before something changed. He stood near the end of the bench when she noticed him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to disappear. He looked ordinary in the way trained men often do. Clean coat, calm face, eyes that missed nothing. He nodded once, small and controlled, as though greeting someone who already knew what to expect. "You shouldn't stay here this late," he said. He stayed later, she replied. Her voice was neutral, but her body stayed still. Alert. He studied her for a moment, weighing something unseen. "You've been asking questions." "I've been lied to," she said quietly. A faint flicker touched his eyes. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. Not a threat. Not a friend. "A long time ago," he said, staring out toward the tracks, "you were given a story. You held on to it because pain needs shape." She said nothing. "You were told he was gone," he continued, presumed lost. "Why do you think they used that word instead of final?" Her heart began to pound so loudly she was afraid he might hear it. He turned slightly toward her. "What you found in that warehouse wasn't meant for you." "I found it anyway," she said. He almost smiled. Not kindness. Recognition. They did move him, he said. They erased him. On paper. On records. In rooms where decisions are made by men who never meet the people they destroy. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her worn bag. Why tell me? She asked. Because it's getting harder to keep the lie clean, he answered. And because someone else is watching you now who doesn't care about old promises. The word watching slid into the air like a warning. She thought of the man with the 2 careful eyes, the way he dropped coins and counted footsteps. Is he alive? She asked. The stranger did not answer immediately. Silence stretched thin. People don't live the way you think when their names are cut out of the world, he said finally. But yes. He's breathing. The word breathing felt too soft, too impossible. She let out a breath that trembled despite her trying to control it. You wouldn't he come back? The stranger's jaw tightened slightly, because he believed the lie too. He thought the best way to love you was to vanish so completely that you could be untouched by the storm that followed him. The platform lights flickered faintly overhead. Elara laughed once, breathless and broken. And all it did was leave me in the wreckage. Yes, he said. It did. A train thundered in the distance, its sound rolling through the station like a warning that time was not patient. They're cleaning things up now, the stranger continued. Old operations. Old names. Old mistakes. She looked at him. Am I a mistake? He hesitated. That depends who you ask, he said. Footsteps echoed behind them. The sound of careful movement. The scrape of a shoe too controlled to be careless. The stranger stood abruptly, shifting his body slightly in front of her. Not touching. Protecting. The man with the waiting eyes stood a few meters away, pretending to read an outdated timetable. Their gazes met. A silent conversation passed between them. Danger. Ownership of silence. Timing. The stranger leaned closer to Lyra, lowering his voice. You need to be careful. You're not invisible anymore. I was never invisible, she whispered back. The man at the timetable turned and walked away, his movements smooth, his interest hidden behind indifference. The stranger relaxed just a fraction. He reached into his pocket and placed something in her hand. Not a coin. A small, folded piece of paper. You didn't get this from me, he said, already stepping back. She opened it slowly. A time. A place. The station platform again, but much later. When she looked up, he was already walking away, disappearing into a door that should have been locked, but wasn't. Elara's breath felt shallow. Everything she had known now felt staged, edited, rearranged by hands she had never seen. The living had not just lied. They had written her grief like a script and expected her to perform it without question. Across the platform, Adrian watched the entire exchange. He felt the shift in air before he saw the stranger sit down. He recognized the posture, the quiet readiness, the subtle guard placed in front of her. He saw the way the stranger's shoulders tensed when he arrived near the end of the bench. He felt the word alive settle into his bones without hearing it spoken. Alive. The watchful man moved too close for comfort. Adrian's muscles tightened. He prepared. If something had happened, he would have broken cover. He knew it, accepted it. But nothing did. The stranger left. The folded paper changed hands, and the night grew quieter instead of safer. Elara sat there alone now, the paper trembling slightly in her fingers. She did not know if she was shaking from fear or something sharper. Hope? She folded it carefully and placed it deep inside her coat. Then she stood, lifted her cup, and began to sing again. But this time, the song was not for coins. It was for answers. Adrian felt it. The sound cut deeper than any weapon he had ever faced. She was no longer waiting. She was moving. And whatever path she stepped onto next, he knew it would lead straight toward him whether he wanted it or not. The clock above the platform ticked forward. Trains came and went, and somewhere between lies and breath, fate began to speak louder than fear. The station felt wrong when her voice was not there. The air was the same. The lights flickered the way they always had. Trains still arrived and departed with tired screams of metal and steam, but the silence where her song should have lived felt heavier than all the noise combined. Elara did not come that night. First, no one noticed. People rarely noticed the absence of things they had learned to ignore. A few commuters passed by her usual pillar without slowing, eyes forward, minds full of their own burdens. Her metal cup sat abandoned near the wall, knocked on its side by a careless foot, coins scattered and forgotten. Adrian noted. He stood where he always did, half shadowed, half exposed, and felt the emptiness settle into him like frost. She was never late. No matter how tired, no matter how cold, no matter how thin her voice became, she always showed up. She had been more reliable than clocks, more faithful than schedules. Tonight there was only space. The clock above the platform ticked loudly. Once, twice. Each second felt like a heartbeat misplaced. He scanned the crowd, searching for the familiar shape of her coat, the slight tilt of her head before she began to sing, the way she always inhaled just a bit longer than necessary before the first note. Strangers filled the spaces, but none of them carried her silhouette. None of them carried her silence. Fear crept in quietly. Not the sharp kind, the kind that changes the way your skin feels. He stepped farther from the shadows without realizing it, letting the fluorescent lights touch his face. If someone were watching him now, they would see a man who had lost something he was never supposed to admit he had. A train pulled in. Doors opened. People stepped off. No, Ilara. The wind slipped through the platform and lifted the edge of the overturned cup. It scraped along the tile with a thin, hollow sound. Adrian crouched and set it upright, his movements instinctive, reverent. He noticed the scattered coins, their dull shine against dirty tile. He picked them up one by one and placed them back inside. The act felt strangely intimate. On the far end of the platform, the watchful man stood again, pretending to scroll through a device that wasn't even turned on. Adrian felt his gaze like a thin wire pulled tight. He straightened, rolled his shoulders back, became invisible again. But Ilara was still gone. The night stretched on. The night stretched on. Other street performers came and went from distant corners. A man with a harmonica, a girl tapping restless rhythms on an empty bucket. Their noises filled the air, but they did not replace what had been missing. Adrian's chest ached. By the last train, he knew something was wrong. This was no simple tiredness. This was absence. When he finally left the station, he did so with purpose, not caution. His steps followed paths he had sworn never to walk again. Side streets where shadows collected, alleys that smelled of oil and rot, fences that could be crossed quietly if you knew where to place your feet. He followed what he remembered of the path she took when she left. Not too close. Not too obvious. Her street was dim, lit by a single flickering lamp that made everything look like it existed within a washed-out dream. Her building stood the same. Old bricks, narrow door, windows that never quite warmed no matter how much light burned inside. He stood across from it for a long time. The windows were dark, no movement, no silhouette of her pacing, of her standing near the glass, arms folded to keep herself together. The silence felt like ice under his skin. He moved closer, careful, quiet. He touched the wall with 2 fingers, grounding himself, like it was the only real thing in a world that had begun to tilt. Was she hurt? Had someone come for her? Had she followed the coordinates and found more than she was meant to? His mind filled with images he tried to destroy, her collapsed on a warehouse floor, her voice finally stolen, her hands reaching for help that never arrived. He clenched his jaw, breathed through it. A light flickered on in the building above, not her window. Someone else's. A shadow moved behind thin curtains. Nothing. He couldn't knock. He couldn't call out. He could only stand there, swallowed by the night, realizing what he had done. He had built a life of distance thinking it was safety. Now he had no right to touch the doors that could lead to her. Back at the station the next night, the cup remained upright. Empty. No song. People began to glance at the silence. Some frowned. Some shrugged. One old man muttered, "She used to sing here." The words passed through Adrian like a blade. She used to. The stranger from before did not appear, neither did the watchful man. The platform felt like a held breath that would never be released. On the 3rd night without her, it began to rain. Not a storm, not a dramatic sky, just a steady, honest rain that soaked into everything slowly. Water pooled where her feet used to stand, her absence reflected in every surface. Adrian stood at the edge of the platform and let the rain touch his face. He did not move to shelter. He deserved the cold. He deserved the waiting. If she had vanished into darkness, it would be his fault. Because he had let the danger grow. Because he had watched instead of acted. Because he had loved her as a ghost instead of a man. He whispered her name once, very softly. Ilara. The rain took it. The night answered nothing. Back in her small apartment, unseen by him, she lay on her narrow bed, with a fever burning through her veins. The broken coin halves rested beside her, the paper with the meeting time crumpled in her trembling hand. She had not stopped singing by choice. She had simply run out of strength. And somewhere between rain and regret, Adrian realized with terrible clarity that if she never came back to the station, he would not lose a mystery. He would lose the last part of himself that still remembered how to breathe. The door to her apartment trembled under a knock so soft it almost didn't exist. Elara did not rise at first. The fever had wrapped her in a strange floating heaviness. The ceiling above her seemed both too close and impossibly far away. Then impossibly far. Her breath was shallow, every inhale tasting of dust and the faint bitterness of cold medicine she had taken hours earlier and already forgotten. The knock came again. Real this time. Careful, alive. She dragged herself upright on trembling arms. The world swayed, then steadied. The broken coin halves slid from the edge of the blanket and clinked softly onto the wooden floor. She did not pick them up. "Who is it?" she called, her voice barely holding together. Silence lingered on the other side. Then a whisper so familiar it almost broke her. "It's me." Her heart did something strange. It stopped, then shattered into motion again. Her bare feet touched the cold floor. Every step felt like walking through memory. Every sound felt like it might vanish if she moved too quickly. She unlocked the door, and the world tilted. He stood there. Not as a ghost, not as a dream, not as a story written in old reports and altered files. He stood there breathing, taller than memory. Older, his eyes darker, lined with exhaustion and something far deeper than tiredness. Rain had soaked his shoulders, water clinging to the worn fabric of his coat. A strand of hair clung to his forehead like the echo of a time when he hadn't been broken. Adrian. For a moment, neither of them moved. The room filled with the quiet thunder of years that had nowhere to go. Her fingers tightened against the doorframe. "Are not real," she whispered. He swallowed. "Liam," she laughed softly, and the sound was not kind. "You can't be." His eyes softened in a way that nearly destroyed him. "I never stopped being." He did not step inside. He stayed at the threshold like he did not deserve the warmth of the air that still belonged to her. Like he knew one wrong movement might make her vanish. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, did not look away. "You're dead," she said, steadier than she felt. He shook his head slowly. "And they told you that, and they showed me papers," she said. "They looked me in the eye." The word fell heavy. She took a step back without realizing it. He stepped forward by instinct and then stopped himself. His hands lifted slightly, empty, harmless. No weapons, no defenses. Just a man standing bare in the truth. "I didn't come here to defend myself," he said. "I came because you stopped singing." The word struck her harder than any truth. Her throat tightened. "You watched me," she said. He nodded. "You listened." Yes. You let me starve." The word hung between them. He flinched. "Yes," he said again. Her hands began to shake. She folded them against her chest to hide it. "Why?" she asked. He closed his eyes for a brief second, as if reopening them required courage he barely had. "I was told to disappear," he said, and not as a suggestion, not as a choice dressed in kindness, as an order. Her fevered mind clung to every word. "They said if I came back, if I spoke your name again, if I let anyone connect us, you would be pulled into a world that eats people," he continued. "And not quickly, not cleanly." Silence filled the small room. "I believed them," he said. "I believed the safest thing I could give you was my absence." Her laugh came out broken. "And what did that give me?" He did not look away. A different kind of war. The truth felt sharp now, clear, painful, real. "I learned how to breathe without air," she said. "I learned how to sleep next to ghosts. I learned how to sing through hunger and fear and nights so quiet I thought the walls would swallow me." He stepped a fraction closer without touching. "I know," he whispered, "because I was there." Her eyes widened. He was close enough to hear you cry through the walls some nights," he said. Close enough to smell the bread you stopped buying. Close enough to see the light in your window go out." She stared at him. "Why not come in?" she asked. "Because I thought I could live with the pain," he said. "And when I stopped singing?" she asked. He looked like a man whose soul had been peeled open. "I understood I couldn't." She swayed slightly. He moved instantly, catching her shoulders without thinking. The touch was electric. "Real, too real." She froze. So did he. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling back slightly but not completely letting go. "I didn't mean to. Don't let go," she said. The word surprised them both. His hands remained light, unsure, as if afraid to bruise a miracle. You're burning up," he said quietly. Burning up," he said quietly. "I feel like the truth," she replied. "That and dangerous." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I should leave," he said. Her hand rose slowly and closed around the fabric of his sleeve. "You don't get to disappear again without answering," she said. He nodded. "I won't." She stepped back and gestured weakly toward the worn chair. "Ease it," she said. "If I'm going to fall apart, I don't want to do it alone." He obeyed, not like a soldier, like a man who had finally come home to something he had thought belonged to someone else. She sat on the edge of the bed. Between them, the years watched. "I don't hate you," she said finally. He looked up sharply. "I could," she added. "I think part of me wants to. But I don't." His breath hitched. "But I can't pretend you didn't change me," she continued. "I can't pretend you didn't break things that will never be whole." He nodded slowly. "I don't want forgiveness," he said. "If it's not real." She reached for the broken coin halves on the floor and held them out to him. "They were never meant to stay whole," she said softly. "Just meant to find each other again." He did not take them. He did not take them. He just looked. And for the first time in years, he did not feel like a ghost watching life from outside. He felt like a man standing in the wreckage of his own choices, finally seen. Outside, the city breathed. Inside, silence stopped pretending. And in the quiet between two shattered hearts, the truth finally had a place to sit. The silence between them did not feel empty. It felt alive. "What? Oh, that's what this feels like," she said. "Not darkness, not brightness, just light that shakes because it doesn't know if it's allowed to exist yet." He nodded once. Outside, the scent of the city softened. A distant siren, a closing door, footsteps in a hallway. Life still moving. She reached down and picked up the two broken halves of the coin from the floor, held them between her fingers, turned them slowly in the light. "They don't fit the way they used to," she said. He studied them. "But they still touch," he said. Her lips curved faintly, the smallest suggestion of a smile. "Stay tonight," she said. The words surprised her more than him. "I won't touch you," he said immediately. She met his eyes. "I didn't ask you to." Silence returned, but softer now, warmer. He nodded. And for the first time since he had walked through her door, he did not look like a man preparing to disappear. As night settled outside, the room filled with something new. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was the fragile, trembling beginning of something that had survived fire. And between anger and fragile light, two hearts sat quietly, daring to believe that maybe, one day, they might not have to be afraid of the dark anymore. Morning arrived quietly, like it wasn't sure if it was welcome. Thin light slipped through the narrow window and rested across the worn wood of the floor. Dust floated gently in the air, catching that pale brightness as if time itself had slowed to watch what would happen next. The room felt different, not healed, not whole, but no longer haunted in the same way. Lara woke first. Her fever had broken in the night, leaving behind a soft, aching exhaustion. For the first time in years, the quiet around her did not feel like abandonment. She turned her head slightly and saw Adrian seated in the same chair where she had left him, his head resting back against the wall. Eyes closed, but not fully asleep. He looked older in daylight. Not weaker, just worn. She studied him in silence, noticing the small scar near his jaw she didn't remember, the quiet tension in his hands even in sleep. A man who had learned to rest without ever feeling safe. He opened his eyes slowly, as if sensing her gaze. "You're awake," he said. "I didn't dream," she replied. He almost smiled. That felt important. She sat up carefully, the blanket slipping down around her waist. The broken coin halves lay on the small table between them, catching the new light. "I can feel it now," she said. "Oh, what?" he asked. "The cost," she said, "of love." She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. Her steps were slow but steady. She moved toward the window again, but this time she did not press her hands to the glass. She simply stood there, letting light fall across her face. "Lull these years," she said. "I thought love was about holding on." She turned slightly toward him. "And now I think it might be about letting go of the right things." He folded his hands together, listening the way he used to when she spoke about distant dreams. "I don't know how to make your life safe," he said quietly. "And I don't know how to walk away from you." She leaned her shoulder lightly against the wall. "I don't want safe," she said. "I've lived in safe." It was empty. He looked up at her. She walked closer to him and picked up the coin halves, placing one in each of his palms. "This is what it costs," she said. He looked down, confused. "To love someone," she continued, "is to risk being broken. Not once, not twice. Twice. over and over if it means something real grows in the cracks. He closed his fingers gently around the metal. There are still people watching, he said. Still dangers I can't erase. She nodded. I know. I could leave, he said. Disappear again. Make them tired of chasing shadows. Her eyes softened. You could, she said. He waited. She said, we could run, he added. She smiled faintly. We could. Silence again. Then she said something he hadn't expected. But neither of those things feels like love. His breath caught. She moved closer, crouching in front of him until they were eye level. I don't want a life built on hiding, she said. And I don't want a love built on fear. He searched her face for doubt. Found only truth. What does love look like to you? He asked. She thought for a long moment. It looks like waking up and choosing truth, even when it hurts, she said. It looks like standing in the light, even when the world tells you to disappear. She rested her hand gently on his knee. And it looks like staying when every instinct tells you to run. He exhaled slowly. I don't know how to be normal, he said. She gave a soft sound that almost counted as laughter. I don't want normal, she said. I want honest. Outside, clouds moved quietly across the sky, the sounds of the building waking. Footsteps, doors, distant radios. Felt distant, unimportant. He stood slowly. For a moment, they were just two people standing inches apart, breathing the same fragile air. He can't promise you a quiet life, he said. I don't need quiet, she replied. I can't promise you safety, he continued. I don't need safety, she said. I need truth. His hand lifted, stopping halfway. She nodded once. Permission. His fingers brushed her cheek, tentative, not claiming, asking. Oh. She did not pull away. This was not the touch of before. That one had been easy. This one was earned. Her eyes closed briefly, then opened. He rested his forehead against hers. Not a kiss, not yet. Just the closeness of two people who had lost and found each other through fire. If I stay, he said, it will cost you. She whispered back, if you go, it will cost me more. He let out a breath that was half pain, half relief. Outside, a bird settled briefly on the ledge of the window before lifting again, wings cutting softly through the air. Time moved, but more gently. She stepped back slightly. There's something you should know, she said. He nodded. When I stood at the station, she continued, and sang for coins, I wasn't singing for survival alone. He waited. I was singing because I wanted to feel alive in a world that had buried me. He felt it in his chest. And now? He asked. She looked at him. And now I don't want to sing for strangers anymore. A quiet understanding moved between them. She walked toward the small table and placed the two halves of the coin together. They aligned perfectly, their crack a thin, visible scar that no longer looked like damage. It looked like history. He stepped beside her. You don't have to choose today, he said. She shook her head. I don't want to run out of days again. He swallowed. What does that mean, he asked. She faced him fully. It means if you stay, she said, you don't disappear when it gets difficult. I won't, he said. It means you don't decide for me anymore, she added. I won't, he repeated. It means we walk toward danger together. Not apart, he nodded. Together. He nodded. Silence returned, but this time it was full of something warm and uncertain and alive. She reached for his hand. He took it. Outside, the city shifted into late morning. Somewhere far away, trains were arriving and leaving. At the station, the platform would be missing her voice. But in this small room, in the soft light of a day just beginning, love revealed what it truly cost. Not perfection. Not safety. Not easy promises. But two people willing to stay, even when the world trembles. And between their joined hands, no longer whole, no longer broken, the future waited. Years did not arrive like storms. They came softly, like dust settling in places that had finally learned how to breathe. Life did not become perfect. It did not become easy, but it became real in a way neither of them had known how to ask for when they were younger. The small house stood at the edge of a quiet town, where trains could still be heard in the distance, but no longer felt like open wounds. The walls were painted in warm colors, and the windows were wide enough to let the morning live inside the rooms. So the air smelled of tea leaves, clean fabric, and time that no longer felt like an enemy. Elora stood at the kitchen sink, humming. Not loudly, not for coins, just for the way sound felt when it belonged to her again. Adrian sat at the wooden table behind her, reading nothing in particular, just turning pages because the movement of them felt peaceful. He had learned how to live in daylight, slowly. carefully, with the kind of effort that came from wanting to stay instead of disappear. They argued sometimes about small things, where to place a chair, which plant needed more light, which memory still hurt too much to touch. But they had learned how to sit in silence without fearing it. That morning, rain tapped gently against the window, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to be heard. Elora turned from the sink and looked at him. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. He lowered the paper slightly. "The shadows? The running," she clarified. He thought for a long moment. "Might miss the illusion of control," he said. "But I don't miss the emptiness." She nodded. She understood that language now. Later that day, they walked to the small field just beyond the house. Grass moved in soft waves, stirred by gentle wind. The world felt wide here, not like escape, but like space to exist. Elora sat and leaned her head against his shoulder. Sometimes," she said, "I think about the girl at the station." He tensed slightly, not from fear, from tenderness. She was brave, he said. She was lonely, she replied. If I could talk to her, he said, I would tell her to hold on. She smiled. And I would tell her to stop punishing herself for loving. They sat quietly. No trains. No whistles. Just wind. Just warmth. In the late afternoon, she went to the piano in the corner of the living room. It was old, second-hand, and slightly out of tune, but it belonged to her. She touched the keys lightly. A melody rose, not sad, not broken, not desperate. Alive. Adrian listened from the doorway, arms folded, eyes soft. This sound no longer hurt him the way it once had. Now it felt like something healing through the air, filling corners he had once closed off. She finished and turned to him. That song, she said, isn't about loss. He leaned against the frame. What is it about? Coming back, she said. Evening arrived quietly. The sky turned warm and deep, the sun sinking without urgency. They stood together by the window, their reflections overlapping faintly in the glass. He reached for her hand. She took it. Not out of fear, not out of need. Out of choice. They did not speak. They did not need to. Silence had become an old friend instead of a wound. Night settled, not like a curtain falling, but like a soft blanket pulled gently over the world. In the small bedroom, a single lamp glowed. They lay side by side, not touching at first, just existing in the same quiet space. Adrian spoke first, voice barely louder than breath. I thought love was something that ended. Elora turned her head slightly. And now? She asked. I think love is what stays, he said. She considered this. Yes, she whispered. Outside, wind moved through the trees and somewhere far away, a distant train passed, its sound faint and almost kind. She reached across the small space between them and let her fingers lace with his. No storm, no fear, just warmth. In the quiet between their breaths, old pain loosened its hold. Old regrets extended a final, tired whisper, then drifted away. They did not forget what love had cost them. They honored it, because what it had healed was deeper, stronger, real. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.